Welcome to Business Resilience Decoded. I am your host, Vanessa Vaughn Matthews, the founder and Chief Resilience Officer of Asfalis Advisors. And today I'm very excited because we have an accomplished guest, and she's going to be speaking on the topic of using technology for global planning. So you guys are in for a really amazing treat. Today, joined with me on this podcast is Anne-Marie McLaughlin. She is the Director of Emergency Management and Continuity at New York University. Anne-Marie, welcome.
Hi, Vanessa. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about global continuity planning with you.
Well, I'm excited. So let's dive in. Can you tell our listeners more about you and how you landed in the world of business continuity?
Sure. Like a lot of people in the field, I didn't start out here. I was working in media relations and public relations, speech writing for the beginning of my career. I was at UMass Boston in 2007, 2008, when universities, I think nationally, a lot of them were looking at their emergency plans. We had Virginia Tech in 2007 and H1N1 2009. Around then, our public safety and risk management offices were looking for help writing plans. And I had already been involved in crisis communications plans and emergency notification. So I got going, helping out writing plans. I really got the bug. So I went back to school, got certifications, and in 2010 became the first emergency manager at UMass Boston. So I was there until 2018 when I started at NYU. So that's sort of my resume, I guess. I really love the field, and I think that one of the reasons it's such a great field to be in is there are always new challenges, and we've certainly faced them in the last year.
Oh, haven't we? So first of all, shout out to you being the first, and not only were you the first person, but the first woman, right? That's amazing. So congratulations to you there.
I'm grateful. And I had a fabulous woman boss who appointed me and said that the communication skills are an important part of the job. And I think, they have helped, right? Because we have to convince people and we have to reach out to folks. So very grateful.
We are definitely influencers in this profession. So can you tell us a little bit more about NYU? We talked before this podcast started. I think most people around the world recognize the brand of NYU, but can you help our listeners have some more perspective on the university?
Sure. Well, and I assume that folks who are listening to this podcast are practitioners. And so I'll sort of think about it from that perspective. I went from a school with about 18,000 enrollment, with maybe a dozen or so buildings to, NYU has over 230 buildings in New York City between Manhattan and Brooklyn. We've got 60,000 students, give or take, 2 portal campuses, one in Abu Dhabi and one in Shanghai, and 15 global sites. So, if you think about continuity planning, going from a smaller scale to a much larger scale, it's a tremendously dynamic and interesting place to work. We are tremendously global. We use a lot of technology. I think necessarily you couldn't do what we do without the technology. So we rely on notification systems. We have continuity planning software that's very flexible that we use for multiple purposes beyond continuity, including emergency management and some of the global security. So it's a really dynamic and interesting place to do this kind of work.
So I imagine you work very closely with your facilities management and global security team.
Exactly. Well, in the global security team, we work hand in hand on, monitoring for global emergencies. They use software that scans the internet, for lack of better, description. It sort of sits at the mouth of Twitter and listens. It's Data Miner, if I can use the name. They provide alerts, and they've been very helpful in letting us know what's happening because we're only so many people, and the global folks are continually monitoring at the global sites as well as in New York City. So they're pretty busy, and they're tremendously helpful for facilities. It's tough because we're in New York City and we have so many buildings. and things happen. And we work super closely with our facilities folks. And again, we use the continuity planning software in emergencies. So, sometimes we think about, planning for audits. We think continuity planning is about, we have to expect an audit and we're going to be, audited by compliance. Our focus really has been for resilience and making, data over documents. So, in an emergency in a place like New York City where you have multiple threats, if you think about this past summer, we had some civil unrest issues with impacts to campus. We're responding to COVID. We have, quarantine and isolation process happening, all these things going on. If we suddenly have a water issue or, utilities or network issue, we need to be able to access continuity data on the spot. So our planning and our software is really geared for that kind of approach.
So just to build on some of the things that you talked about, one key word that you said is NYU is global, and one of your campuses is in Shanghai. So let's go back to 2020. Global pandemic starts in Asia, China specifically. You have a campus there. It makes its way around the world. And then around May of 2020, then there's protests all over the world, 60 countries, over 100 days consecutively. Yeah. So how did those events impact NYU from a global perspective?
It all started really in October. We were out in Shanghai in October doing a functional exercise. And again, we used technology to facilitate functional exercises. We do tabletops as well, but we try to do functional exercises so we can practice our communications and use the technology using a scenario. And when we were planning the exercise, initially we had thought about doing a typhoon exercise, and the folks in Shanghai said, no, we feel really good about our typhoon plans. Really, we want to do an infectious disease outbreak exercise. We feel that that would be most valuable. So we ended up doing an infectious disease exercise in Shanghai in October. And by, late December, January, we were talking with them about their, the impacts that they were seeing, and they indeed were not able to open. There were all kinds of impacts. And as we were talking with the staff there, they said, isn't this strange? We played this out in October. And I think that the lesson there, people were joking that we had some kind of, supernatural awareness. And we were like, no, this is just good emergency management and continuity planning. We did a risk assessment, and part of that was, involving stakeholders, and they let us know that this was something that interested them and that they considered a real threat. And it turned out to be, to be a real response for them. And I mentioned the global security team. They were, supporting our response. Again, the 15 global sites, we saw impacts there, and it really did go, we could see it coming, and I think the United States could see it coming, right, from, across the globe towards us. We had daily IMT meetings, and, then we started our response in New York in March when things, went remote. But in February, early February, we were reminding people of their continuity plans and giving folks in New York a heads up, this is coming.
So I hear coordination, I hear communication, I hear logistics.
A lot of people involved and a lot of support, particularly for, the students involved. We have tremendous teams in Office of Global Programs, Global Services, Student Affairs. We've got folks who are, supporting our students. If you think about continuity planning in an academic environment, it's certainly business continuity planning, but it also includes, taking care of people. It includes psychological health and support. It includes, academic continuity, which is all about, not only instruction, but also research and research funding. So there's lots of pieces to it, and we couldn't do it without the team that we have.
Absolutely. So oftentimes when a crisis like what we've experienced in 2020 hits our companies, whether it's internal or external, typically the number one thing that no longer gets funded is training. However, you and your team invested in exercises, you invested in preparedness, you invested in training. So when you think back to that investment that you made back in October, I'm assuming 2019,
Yep.
what are the top two things that those exercises and that preparedness helped you to do from a global perspective?
I think the two things, one is sort of a small thing, but it's really not a small thing, and the other is larger. I'll start with the small thing. Part of this functional exercise, and by functional, I mean we actually did, we communicated. We had a sim cell set up, and we had one of our interns who's from China make phone calls, drill phone calls to our dispatch center, our global dispatch center in New York. And she was posing as a parent of a student in Shanghai, and she was speaking Mandarin. And it allowed us to test our language line. It sort of worked, but it sort of didn't. And it allowed, we want to discover issues, right? So we were able to have an improvement plan with the vendor, and that helped us. And I said, it seems like a small thing, but it's really not, because on a bad day, we want parents to be well cared for. And if we can't speak Mandarin, we want to make sure that that communication happens through our language service. So that was something that I considered a good outcome of that exercise. The other outcome, which is bigger, I think, was the confidence that we gained working as a team. I was with William Carnardi, who works with me as emergency manager. We were in Shanghai with the team there, supporting them. And the Global Security Operations Center folks were back in New York. And just having that teamwork exercise and just sort of feeding injects to the groups and seeing people interact with each other, I think that really helped when it came time to respond in real world scenario. So we had this real thing, and everybody knew each other, which isn't always easy to accomplish globally.
Yeah. So the use of technology helped foster effective communication, and it helped bring the confidence that your team needed, not only the emergency management and continuity team, but the departments, the faculty, the students that you guys also serve and support. I know we don't have too much more of your time, and I wish we could talk about this for many more hours. So I want to pause and say thank you so much for sharing about your experience at NYU, what you've been doing. And also, this is a great opportunity for those of you who work in academic organizations to take a chance to reach out to Anne-Marie to do some best practices and to think about ways that you might be able to collaborate and learn more about her experience. So with that being said, where can our listeners find you?
Sure. Well, I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. And if you want to reach me at my NYU email, it's McLaughlin, all one word, AMCLAUGHLIN @nyu.edu.
Well, there you have it. Thanks for tuning in to Business Resilience Decoded with the Disaster Recovery Journal and Asfalis Advisors. Subscribe, share, download, and look out for future episodes.